Hello everyone, I'm Colin Canet. Many of you have been asking me questions on working with epoxy resins, so today I'm going to show you how easy it is and some of the tricks that I've learned in working with this product. Epoxy resins come in two parts, the resin and the hardener. Check your packaging to find out what the mixture ratios are. And I'm really liking this Canadian product, this Epoxy. It has a very low odor, which I really like. Now I've thrown together a couple of boxes that we're going to make lids for today, but I don't think we'll actually get a chance to put the lids on today. But here's what we're going to do. The one top that I'm going to make is going to be a filling of this knothole. And you've seen me do this before, and I filled it with black. Today I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something different, and you'll see that when we get to it. So stick around for that. This one is another version that I'm going to do, and this is going to be my version of a river table, or a river top in this case, but I'm calling this, in this case, we're going to make a St. Louis top. And for those of you who live in St. Louis, you will know that that's where the Missouri River flows into the Mississippi. So what I'm going to do, I've never seen this before, where we'll actually bring one stream in here and it will join with another one here, just like the Missouri flows into the Mississippi. So just kind of a different top. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Now when we mix up these epoxies, we'll end up with sort of a syrupy kind of mixture. And just like the oil in your car, if there's a little gap somewhere in your place where you're pouring it, it will leak out. And what some people do is they use this tuck tape and they will line the inside of a box with this. And this works okay, but this tape is kind of expensive. And you know what? These resins are not inexpensive either. You want to make sure that you don't waste it. And that's why I'm taking a bit of extra time with you to show you these details. What I'm going to be using today, you can see that I've already made the start of a box, and I'm going to be, and you can see I've got some lines in here. I've already measured out where I want my next pieces to go. But what I'm going to be doing, I have some, in my case, some clear plastic. I'm going to be lining my box with the clear plastic, and I've already measured it out, so that after I cut this, and the next thing I'm going to do is go to my bandsaw and cut the river pattern out of there, and eventually that's going to get laid inside there so that it can't leak and it can't drip, and then we'll pour the epoxy into the river. There, I just took a moment to finish putting the edges on, and you can see there's a gap there, and that doesn't matter because I'm going to be using the plastic. All right, let's have a quick look and see what that looks like, if I can remember how it goes. There we are. There, does that, for the nice folks in St. Louis, does that look something like what it looks like? I hope it's close anyway. It's just a test here today anyway. Okay, now what we need to do now, of course, is figure out the volume. Now, how on earth do you figure out the volume of that? Well, what they tell you is to measure the depth and take the average side. But look, I've got a super simple way of doing that. Watch this. I'm going to take this bag of dry beans. You know, they're very inexpensive. And look at this. I can just fill this gap with dried beans. Fill it so that it's just barely reaching the top all the way along here. And actually, we want a tiny bit high because we want a little bit more resin, because some of the resin is going to seep underneath these boards. But look at that. There's my exact volume of resin that I'm going to need. I didn't have to measure anything, didn't have to do anything. All I need to do now is take this out of here, pour this into a measuring cup, and that will tell me what the volume is that I need. So there's my volume of beans. It's 8 ounces, so I'm actually going to mix 10 ounces because I need a little bit more because some of it's going to seep under the wood. And also it's easier to cut 10 ounces in half, so I need 5 ounces of resin and 5 ounces of hardener. Now, the other reason that we always want to mix more, and this is very important, they tell you to mix at least 10 or 15% more than what you need. And one of the reasons is that it flows underneath the wood, and we'll talk about that later on. The other reason is when you're mixing it, and this company tells you to mix for a minimum of 5 minutes, and that is the case. When you mix it, you will never ever get all of the hardener to the resin in the sides. So when you pour this into your mold, what you should never do with any of these resins is scrape the sides. That's the worst thing you can do, because very often the resin on the sides never got any hardener, or the resin on the bottom never got any hardener mixed with it. So when it comes out, when it finally dries, it never actually hardens. It will remain sticky forever, and you don't want that to happen. And that's the other reason you need to mix more than what you need, so that you just pour it out and you don't scrape it. And the other thing that people like about epoxies is you can add colors to them. And there's two kinds of colors. There's translucent, and translucent is like stained glass windows where you can see the color through the glass. But then there's also opaque, and opaque means you can't see through it. And there are pigments and dyes and colorings, and a translucent is great if it's in a situation where there's light flowing through it. If you try and use a translucent where there's not light flowing through it, such as the case with a box, where of course it's going to be dark on the inside, in this case, I'm going to be using this little metallic dye, and this is opaque. So the light will reflect off this, so it'll still be very blue, but you won't be able to see through it. Now the next thing I need to do is make sure that where I'm pouring this, that it's absolutely level. Remember when I told you that this is sort of like an oil, like a syrup, and it will find its own place that's level. And you can see how far off my workbench is, but it's imperative, especially if it's a big pour, that you make sure that you're working on a level surface. Okay, I know this isn't the best view for you, but you get an idea anyway. I've got a block here, and you can see that I've got everything that's laying on top here. Normally I would try and clamp this, but in this case I'm having to put weights on so that you'll be able to see everything. And this one is hanging over a little bit here, but you can see the river in here where I'm going to be doing the pour, and I've got the plastic as flat as I can get it, and it's as close to the edges as I can get it without tearing the plastic, so it should be all good. The next thing I need to do now is to mix the epoxy. And I'm just going to pour 5 ounces of resin first of all, and it doesn't really matter which one you pour. I just like doing the resin first of all, and then I'll pour 5 ounces of the hardener, and then I'm going to mix it together, and I'm going to put a little bit of this colorant in it. This is a metallic colorant, and with colorants you always start off very low. You put just a tiny bit in, mix that up, and then if you need more you keep adding, but you start off with very small quantities. So I'm going to be doing that. And I'm just going to add, I've got this partially mixed now, I'm just going to add a tiny bit of coloring to it, and I'll mix that in, and then I'll add more if I need it. Okay, so that's been about 5 minutes that I've been mixing that now, and I've put some colorant into it a couple of times. You can see that it's flowing very nicely. You'll also notice that it's full of bubbles, and because this is such a slow curing product, I'm just going to let this sit for 3 or 4 minutes and let those bubbles come up to the top, and then later on, after I've poured it, I'm going to put a little bit of heat on this, and I'll show you that as well, because that helps to heat up the product a little bit as it's curing, and that helps to drive the bubbles out as well. Okay, a lot of the bubbles have come to the top, but I'm not going to wait for all of them. I should be able to pour it in one area and it will slowly fill the entire area. So I'm just going to slowly pour that in there and just let it run. You can see it's running into all the other areas there. Now, I'm almost done here, but what I'm going to do now, I'm going to use this heat gun just to heat the material up just a little bit, and you can see there's some bubbles on there, and it'll just help to drive those bubbles out. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to do another pour as well today. In this case, we're going to fill this knot, but instead of filling it with blue and instead of making a whole tray, it's a little riskier, but this case we're going to use tape, this tuck tape, and we're going to lay some layers down over top, and that should be enough to hold that liquid in there so that it doesn't leak. Okay, well, magically, it's day 2, and this has been sitting for 24 hours, so we're going to have a look at it, what I call the St. Louis top, and this should peel off pretty easily. There it is. And that's the beauty of using this plastic, is now I can just take that right away, and there's what our resin looks like. And there's the back of it, and you can see there's some wrinkling in there, and that's from the plastic, and that's typical of what you're going to get when you use plastic. And depending again on what you do, you could actually use this, so there's some texturing that you could use from that. If you take a lot of time, you can make that nice and smooth. There's lots of options there with that. So that's what the front looks like. You could now plane, you can cut this with any of your saws. There's a lot of things that you can do. You can sand, you can plane, you can joint, all sorts of things to finish this. And then, of course, you can finish the wood and do all sorts of edge surfacing. Now, it's pretty common to get some very fine bubbles when you're working with resins, and I did that on here. In a lot of cases, you'll be planing or sanding the very top of that off, and that's where most of those bubbles will congregate. And when you lightly heat this up, it warms it up, and the bubbles normally come to the top, and they did in this case. And as I was doing it later on off camera, I decided that I wanted to leave some of these because it actually looked a little bit like a river flowing. So in this case, I'm actually going to leave those because I think it kind of enhances the look of this. And you can see on the red here, I also had some bubbles, but I was able to get rid of them altogether, so you can see what that looks like. Well, that concludes my video for today, and I hope that answered so many of the questions that I've had on working with resins. Just a really cool way of using some little thing to enhance your woodwork, things to make it stand out a little bit more. So lots of cool things you can do, and I think we'll use this a little bit in the future from time to time. Just some little tricks and things that we can do to make our woodworking look even better. I'm Colin Canet for Woodwork Web. Thanks for watching.